Oh, look at that. I didn't think you had it in you.
Tell me more about this place. You spent nearly 90 years there.
What? No. No, not there. The forest is just the lobby. That's where the entrance is. I've been thinking, how do I remember all this? When did I make these memories? You need a brain to make memories.
Your brain is now remembering things that never happened to you, or to it. An enormous amount of neuron connections were formed since you came back. Decades worth of memory.
And there's one more thing you need to do.
Karen? Hey? Karen?
Yeah, sorry.
Are you alright?
Yes, I'm just tired.
Tell me. Did you see any of the others?
Yes. I damn near fainted. Even though he had told me about them.
You think that was one of them?
I know.
You're the only one who woke up, Karen. One out of tens of thousands. Why?
Well, welcome to this Dean Speaker Series, and we all just got a sneak peek into the latest Unity Technologies capabilities. And as I will explain, our guest here today, John Riccitiello, is the CEO of Unity. It is a remarkable company. It's a remarkable domain. He's slicing into many of the major trends that are happening in society in various ways, as you will hear. So I'm Rich Lyons, Dean of the Business School here, the Haas School. Welcome to this Dean Speaker Series. I'm delighted to be able to launch this here today. The special welcome also today to the MBAs here from our Haas Digital Media and Entertainment Club. They are co-sponsoring this talk today, so we appreciate their partnership. There are also quite a few DMEC members here. And they are joining us today, and many of them had a chance to have lunch with John just a little bit earlier. DMEC, as they are often referred to, that is our premier campus club for digital media and entertainment careers at Berkeley, and especially here at Haas. They look forward to hosting more esteemed professionals on campus in the future, so just check out their website in particular if this is a domain that interests you a lot. John, what to say about John. John's been a friend of mine for a number of years now. We met, we were in our careers by the time I got a chance to meet him, but it's been over a decade now. And let me just say a few things about John. We're roughly equal vintage from here at Berkeley. As many of you know, he's a class of 1981 alum of our undergraduate business school here at Haas. It wasn't called Haas at the time. We were both in Barrows Hall. After Haas, John worked globally in management for a variety of consumer goods companies, Clorox, PepsiCo, Sara Lee, among them. In 1997, he returned to the Bay Area and joined Electronic Arts, company you all know, serving as president and chief operating officer. In 2004, 7 years at EA, he left the company to co-found Elevation Partners, private equity partnership focused on media and entertainment. He has served as managing director there for 3 years. In 2007, when then CEO Larry Probst stepped down, John was rehired by EA, and through March of 2013, he served as CEO and director at Electronic Arts. Under John's leadership, the company saw its online, mobile, and digital revenues grow more than 500% to a total of $1.6 billion US. In 2014, he moved to his current position as chairman and CEO of Unity Technologies. For those of you not familiar with Unity, it's a platform for creating and engaging 3D, 2D, VR, AR, apps and games. With offices located around the world and headquartered right here in San Francisco, more games are made with Unity than any other game technology. Let me conclude by saying that John, he's a Berkeley leader. And when we talk about the sorts of people who just personify our 4 defining principles, he is it. Whether it's beyond yourself, we were just talking about students always, the maniacal commitment to continuing to learn in his career. We're fortunate to have him here today and his ongoing support in so many areas. He's also a Haas board member. Let's all join in with welcoming John. Thank you, John, for being here. So let me, if I could, just kind of jump into. You could sort of walk us through the park just a little bit. Some of us are deep in AR and VR and AI and machine learning, but could you give us just a little bit of the landscape from your vantage?
Huh. That's a broad question.
Yes, it is.
Starting point, the video you just saw. The reason that is up there is the view of the world just a few short years ago is third-party tools, a tool for content creation, like Unity, could never be sort of out of the box able to create something that looks like that. You know, we were known for puzzle games. You know, you can put jewels on a map or pieces of candy. But the point of that was to show just how rich and deep you can create. That was 7 guys, 2 women, 5 guys, and they made that in about 4 months. And it's not film. That's all digital animation, and it's real time, and I'm going to touch on that a lot today, which means, you know, if we had a controller, we can go in there and drop characters and run around and look at it from any angle, look under the plants, over the plants, from the trees, the rest of it. And content isn't made that way broadly today. It is in the game industry and increasingly in virtually every sector of the economy, and we have customers in auto space and aerospace, the auto industry, you know, Gensler in architecture, construction, medical arena, Jet Propulsion Lab, the CERN folks, Caltech, all using the technology to do things that kind of work like that. And the reason that's a good starting point to answer your question is I think there's a number of super important defining technologies that as much as, you know, things like the internet sort of changed our lives, you know, starting in the 80s and 90s, are going to change our lives in the course of the next few years. And I think we know most of them, but I'm going to include a few that are maybe you haven't thought of. Without doubt, you know, the notion of AR and VR, it's hard without penetrating that in a huge and deep way to explain why I believe this, but I think you can believe me when I say that within a 10-year time frame, the vast majority of people in knowledge jobs, the kind of jobs you guys are all going to take, are going to have some sort of augmentation or virtual device on their heads as part of their workday, all day long. It's going to bring them information, insight, it's going to connect them for communication. It is going to be pervasive, and it's also going to be a very pervasive entertainment device. So these things are going to change a lot. At the root of all of that, visual search is likely to augment, if not largely replace, digital search. So companies like Google are under a place where they have massive opportunity, or they could be replaced entirely. Strings of text is not the most efficient way to find things. And we're going to be wandering around with these objects on our heads, and they will be small in format, and we will be interpreting the world in a way that is entirely unlike we are today, and most all of search will be changed. Social will be changed. So big bundle of stuff in that, but that's important, one part of the landscape.
So just so I'm clear, much of that could be visual, right? You see something and it's like it is explaining what you're seeing or giving you background or the many, many things you might want to know. Right?
I will have a pair of glasses that will attach the names of most of you when I glance out at the audience. If I stare at your shoes, they'll tell me where to buy them. If I look at your necklace, they're going to tell me how many carats or if it's fake. Sorry about that. But it'll be an infinitely larger pot of data.
Got it.
The second thing that I think is going to happen, the reason I think is that it replaces a lot of shirts, it can be contextual for where you're standing, where you're sitting, who you're with. Yeah. Like staring at you here, I might get different information if we're in a bar, right? And because it knows where you are. Yeah. So another big bundle of this is, there's a surge in issues related to, machine learning and AI. Unity processes billions, actually many, many, many billions of signals every day around the 2.5 billion folks that are carrying applications built on our platform. But we're a small player in that world, but it's in numbers similar to Facebook and Google, but the absolute staggering amount of data. That kind of machine learning and AI is important for anything from autonomous driving to digital or visual search. It's going to be so incredibly important to so many things. So I think if you're looking for another big thing that it touches us, it's really important. That's it. The third thing I'd tell you is virtually every form of content and the way it's created and distributed is going to change based on the video I just showed you. So, movies are made in 2D. They take a film from a particular place, not built in a full 3D world. It's a crazy inefficient way to make things, and it's not reusable at all. Car designs are done with 2D tools. Most of the film and car design systems aren't real time, so the editor will create something and you get to look at it the day after tomorrow. This stuff, you create it, you look at it the moment you create it. And and what are the practical implications of some of this? Just some other industries that will get disrupted. One practical implication is, there's a $1 trillion industry called apparel. Global business, today almost 30% of it is mailed to your house as opposed to found at a retail store. That number is forever rising. Of the 30 or so percent, which was forever rising, about a third of it comes back because it doesn't fit, doesn't look like, doesn't match your belt, whatever the reason happens to be. The Amazon of tomorrow or the Everlane of tomorrow, and we're not talking about tomorrow like 10 years tomorrow, we're talking about tomorrow like 2019. You'll say, hey, I'm wearing this particular shirt. It fits me pretty nicely. I'm wearing those shoes. They put 5 things in. It's got a digital copy of your body at that point. We've already got the CAD models for every piece of apparel and all these things. The model that walks across in that little video you see isn't going to be 6'3" and possibly thin. It's going to be you. And that'll dramatically change, I think, both engagement and purchase patterns, but it'll also dramatically change the staggering waste of delivery, return, and redelivery. And for economic reasons, they have to do it. But I can't begin to tell you, but trust me, doctors that are now doing macroscopic surgery or they're opening your chest, you do not want them looking at just one side of the arteries that they're cutting through. You want them looking at both sides of the arteries they're working through. And that can only be done with a real-time 3D presentation of what they see with a couple of cameras and processing that to give them a full view so they can look under, around, and behind. It'll be safer. It'll change things. And so if I were to pick on things that, we can get into rockets and we can decide that, whether you believe they're going to be flying above the city of Los Angeles or tunneling below. If you're looking for just gigantic things that are just right in front of us that are impossible to ignore. One is this sort of a digital revolution around true 3D with AR and VR and the camera getting closer and closer and to the point where it's attached to your forehead. The second is, I can get into so many of the trend lines around machine learning and why we've got a big team around that and why it's making a difference, but it's making a absolutely gigantic difference. And virtually every industry is going to be disrupted. I'll just give you an example. How many of you guys watch Netflix? Most of you? Right, so what are they doing? They create a frame at a server, they compress the frame, and they send it down. Well, that's what are they, 30, 40% of all internet traffic? It's insane. If the content were created digitally, you could send the data down and use a tool like Unity to recreate it at the phone, television, whatever, and send down 1/10,000th of the amount of information. And still, you know, have a successful, it'll look the same. By the way, if you wanted to, you could make the car blue or green or yellow, it doesn't matter. It's not one product, it's being rendered on your local device. This is one of the things, whether it's shopping at Amazon or Everlane, or it's the way, you know, streaming is going to work. These three technologies between them are going to blow up industry after industry after industry, or reset the economics in industry after industry.
Remarkable, remarkable. And was there, when one thinks about this technology to do in 3D what we've done so much in 2D, it's an accumulation of breakthroughs, but are there certain fundamental transition where you say that really unlocked it over the last few years?
Well, look, I think it's been, you know, to a degree, Moore's Law, and then, you know, Jason Chen, in a way, you know, if you go down to NVIDIA. But it's, so before you could do any of this stuff, you need pretty staggering processing capability. So that's sort of a starting point. The second aspect, a lot of these things interweave, a lot of what allows you to create content like that is no one drew every blade of grass there. What happened was that somebody patterned out a number of them and used machine learning algorithms to create more, because no one could draw that. There would be that, you know, a few short years ago, that would have been 100 people for 3 years to create something that looks like that. So the same technologies are enabling, and then literally 30 years of gaming, 20 years of 3D gaming has and the development has taught us how to optimize algorithms and optimize code. And there's a new gigantic transformation about to take place there if we want to talk about it. But that's one piece of it. So it's just all this advancement in terms of how content is created is met with infinitely more powerful processors. And the two of those things have unlocked the next generation.
Well, I love the point you just made about, look, you send a frame or you send zeros and ones. I mean, we could be, you know, 100 times more efficient just in using the capacity we already have, right? In distributing
a lot of things are like
content. But that's a very exciting idea. So when you think about kind of going back to Unity and what look out, you know, 5 years, how important could that role that Unity is playing get? Like, for example, if one thought about, you know, the education industry, a lot of what you're talking about obviously has tons of applications in my industry. Just don't try and disrupt my industry. But if you actually played out the vision, right, then if this is kind of a kernel of what's going to play out in an awful lot of industries, that's pretty interesting.
Well, I mean, Unity has, I mean, how to put this? Everyone's got, or at least many people have a vision for the company they lead, and when you're all in position of leading companies, you'll have those for your company too. The reality is that you have a lot of certainty over the next 90 days or the next year, and you've got, you know, increasingly less certainty about, you know, 10 years out. And jobs of people like me is to make concrete the 10 years out, to make it more of a reality than it would otherwise be. You know, you don't want to fail for the lack of ambition or imagination. Now, just to touch on education for a second, as we speak today, there are 500,000 people in the world being trained in Unity. You know, that's more people that are studying, you know, computer science in the world today. So it's a pretty neat data set of, you know, people coming into the world. And that gives you one sense of where our ambition is. So I will frame up a little of that ambition. You know, the first of them is that today about 55% of all interactive entertainment is built in Unity. That number's been rising 10 to 15 points a year for the last few years. I expect it to continue to rise. And new industries, automotive, aerospace, you know, big data, et cetera, are using our tools for lots of new things, and we're making that happen on purpose. And, you know, film industry starting to use our tools, you know, bunch of others. And so, you know, the first thing is that we now serve half the game industry. What I want to be serving is half the world's content creation. And I see that as very possible over the course of the next, you know, 5 to 10 years. The second thing, we currently monetize through our monetization network, ads, analytics, in-app purchase, and the rest, We monetize about 1.2 billion users monthly. That number's doubled in about 18 months. I expect it to be more like $1.5 billion, $1.8 billion by the end of this year. But we monetize them relatively lightly because our value added is as great as it could and it should be. Where I'd like to be in a longer term frame, in a 5 or 10 year frame, would be monetizing half the world's population, but in dollars, not cents. And so that seems, graspable. Yeah. Now we'll share that with our partners. Maybe less evilly than say Google does, but we'll share it with our partners. But there's a lot there.
There sure is.
And then the third thing that we're after is, as I mentioned, there's 500,000 folks presently being trained in Unity. We want to see that get to a couple million. Yeah. And frankly, the point here is probably more profoundly important than either of the first two. I'm a profound believer that, when I was in school, I used to complain to my kids were in school, I used to complain to the school boards and the principals that they think they're teaching our kids technology when they're showing them how to use a spreadsheet. And you've heard me talk about this before. I believe that we want to give every child the invitation to create technology, to create something that is fundamentally new in the world. I think the world's a better place with more creators. And one of the things I'm trying to get to in every geography in the world, we actually have we have one user in North Korea. We have more users than that in every other country in the world. We have users in every country on the planet. And what I'm trying to get to, and by the way, market leaders in every country on the planet except for North Korea, but I don't know what they're doing there yet. But the point that I'm trying to get at is I'm trying to get to a point where I think tools like Unity make technology creation. As simple as iPhones make film creation. And the point of getting there and inviting people in, they can build careers and move themselves out of the third world into the first world, from lower economic status to higher economic status. It's insanely inclusionary. Yeah. And we're tying the network, we're trying to tie the network together. So if you're in a network of millions upon millions of users using the same tools, you can get contextual help from people who know precisely how to do it. Yeah. So making the world a lot smaller and making it a lot more powerful for content creators.
It's a powerful vision. John, we learn lots of things from lots of people. John has taught me lots of things. The thing that comes to mind, top of mind for John, is paint a picture of the future, right? As a leader, right? He's given me this advice. It's sort of like, make sure people can see it. Make sure they can see that it's achievable. Make sure everybody can see how valuable it is. Sharpen it as much as you can, right? So we talk about strategy and direction setting as leaders, but this notion of, paint the picture that everybody can see and you can communicate quickly, right? And you've just been terrific at that in your career. I just wanted to say that. I'm going to pivot twice more, and then I'm going to open it up to, because I know the audience has some questions here. So here's a pivot into more kind of into your leadership and your style of leadership. And this is kind of a narrow question, but I think it'll be a fun one for us to hear about. You've been the CEO of public companies. You've been CEO of private companies. Can you talk a little bit about how governance and the forces that play on you as CEO differ in the public and private ownership worlds?
Well, I think leadership in public or private has transformed a lot. I mean, there's a lot of good things that have come from increased regulation and scrutiny on how management teams work. And the world should never have seen an Enron, and the world should never have seen the subprime mortgage meltdown. There's been a lot of things that have caused, the world we live in, which today it's very simple to say that running a public company is painful. The amount of disclosure together with the expectations of shareholders, which are often really, really short term, makes it difficult to be bold. I learned an interesting data point from some folks last week, that of the new IPOs that went out last year, any guesses from any, what % had dual class shares? Any guesses? What's that? 90. I did not know that. I'm now shopping for somebody that can advise me on dual class shares. But what that's an obvious reaction to is,
so keeping the governance.
And look at, Facebook, and Google have dual class shares, and Microsoft might as well, given the concentration of ownership. They're reacting to how difficult it is to navigate. And at least from my perspective, I found it, I've always tried to be bold and aggressive with what I do in business. I found it a lot easier to do in a private environment than a public environment. And we had this thing in board governance over at the Battery not that long ago on exactly this subject. And there is something that is not good today with how public markets work and boards work. You know, you got to put on sort of a combat suit to be head of audit or head of comp committee in today's public world. It's painful. And I think for those of you that are on the early stages of your careers, you know, and there's some important decisions. There's some great experience that comes from working in public companies, and then there are public companies that are shielded from some of the vagaries and difficulties of being public by just how damn successful they are, or boat structures or concentrated ownership. So it's not all public or all private. But think very carefully about, you know, the nation base of the company you're going to work for, the capital structure of the company you're going to work for, the degrees of freedom you perceive them to have and to operate, you know, beyond just looking at, do you like the product and the guy or gal that you're interviewing with. You know, think about the context you're going to be in. I know that when I graduated here, I was far more naive on those points than I am today. And the few, I've been lucky to only make a few fairly fundamental career mistakes. And the few that I've made have been entirely because I underestimated the impact of, you know, issues around exactly this point. In other words, I just assumed that the right answer wins. You know, it doesn't matter what your capital structure is, and it doesn't matter what your board structure is. It doesn't matter what the voting structures are. And I've learned that that's definitely not true.
That's a great point. That's a great point. You know, just I think most everybody knows this, but this idea of dual class shares, I mean, historically we think of one share, one vote. And if you own a share, you get a vote, and then you get to pressure management as you see fit. The idea is, no, you can own the company and not have a vote. And that's a kind of share that increasingly the companies are saying, look, we want to keep control of the company. You get to decide whether you want to own us or not, right? And that's kind of a hybrid, little bit hybrid. It's still public markets, but it's a little bit hybrid.
And there's been sharp criticism of some of the dual class structures, like the publicly sold shares of Snap have 0 votes. And no one thinks that they're sort of lolling around in a great corporate governance model. So, you know, but I'm not suggesting that dual class shares is the solution to anything.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess this is a pivot, but it just follows right on your last comment. When you think about managing your own career and some of the choices you've made out of Berkeley and then along the way, you know, how did you kind of spend your time? What did intentionality look like in your early years, and might you have done it different?
I mean, some things I would have done different. This is actually a question that came up almost identical to, you know, you hadn't quite walked in the room for lunch. And, you know, what I would say is, even though you hadn't come along when I was at Cal, the defining principles of Haas so come out of the Cal experience. And yeah, they're tailored around a Haas environment, but they are real. And I'd say that the part of my career that I'm probably most proud of is, you know, I don't think I've harassed anybody. I don't think I've stepped anybody's back to get anywhere. I think I've lived fairly well the Haas defining principles, in part because coming to Cal sort of filters you to be an appropriate candidate to embody those virtues or capabilities, or at least the ambition to best model those traits. The second thing, in just terms of a career path, you know, when I came out of school, I went to work first for Clorox, and there was 11 management layers between me as a brand assistant and the CEO, 11. And you get promoted vertically pretty often in an 11-level company. Nobody has 11 levels anymore. Nobody's got 10, 9, 8, 7, maybe 6. And so you're going to build a career that is really not the sort of 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s model. And it's because things like email and telephones and video conferencing is just so fundamentally flattened organizations. So you have to say to yourself, how do you navigate where you don't have the reward of promotion as being the path. You know, you look for the promotion as I did early in my career.
Yeah.
And I think that one I got right. And I kept my eye on two ideas. You know, one of them's really obvious, and it comes out of the defining principles students always, but learning. You know, just be, you know, like, try to be smarter tomorrow than today, or at least a little wiser. You know, try to ingest more information, listen well, listen deeply. Another subject we'll get into if we want to, but if you're doing that, you're ahead of most. You know, at least in my experience, the vast majority of people atrophy way earlier in their careers than they could because they stop learning. They stop being curious. They stop asking questions. And I mean like 25, 27, 28. I find it really weird when graduates of Haas or Stanford or, you know, Northwestern or Georgia Tech or Harvard, they plateau as junior managers because they, as ambitious as they were as children that got them into those programs, how quickly others pass them when they're not moving. And then the second part, and this has worked particularly well for me, it's not obvious that it's the best advice, but I did give it to both my daughters and they're following it, which is, you know, when you're faced with a choice, you know, doing one thing or another, or 1, 2, and 3, pick the one with the best story. You know, pick the one that you imagine yourself, you know, with a grandson or daughter on your knee, that you're going to want to tell the story of how you ended up in Iraq talking to Saddam Hussein, which I did, or that, you know, the one that, you know, has you move to Germany and have a job that's in German, but you don't know a word of German and you have to learn it in a matter of months. Pick the one that's going to, you know, I don't know anything about that technology, but damn, I can learn quick. You know, this is not an argument to fake it till you make it, although all leadership and all work has a little bit of that as you know, the learning curve when you first get into things. But it's quite honestly, get out of your comfort zone as often as possible and put yourself in a position to have a better story. It's certainly an awesome way to continue to learn and keep, you know, avoid the ever-present fear that I have was becoming bored with myself. So I don't know if that's good for anybody out there, but I think it's reasonable.
I love it. I love it. And it lines up. It lines up with what we stand for. Let's open it up to you. I'm sure you've got some questions and thoughts on anything we've covered or anything else. Who's got a first question? Thanks, Patrick. Is there a mic? I think we have one somewhere. There. Oh, it's on the side. Yeah, so we've got one on either side. So if you have a question, you can queue up. We have a little bit of time, so we can take some questions. Yeah.
John, I like your point on narrative, and I'm wondering if you can fill in your narrative between tech visionary now and sort of futurist. From, I think you started your career selling soap and soda in the 80s. So can you help sort of fill in some of that narrative?
Sure.
Yeah.
Look, life is a lot of random things. I ended up getting the job at Clorox because my across the hall mate, Cindy Yang, had an interview with Clorox, and she had a bad cold and a cold sore and didn't want to go do it. And there was a recruiter, I still remember his name, Bruce Eswin. She wanted me to go give him a note and tell him that she couldn't make it. And to give you an idea of how well I planned my career, I never heard of product management, you know, and I thought Clorox only made bleach, so I didn't know they did other things. And I had no interest in that whatsoever, but I gave the guy the go. He goes, well, I got free time now, where do you get lunch? And so, you seem like a smart young man, you can write the rest of that. And so there's a lot of randomness goes in it, but at least for mine, I started consumer products, you know, Clorox and then Pepsi, ended up in Europe for quite a while. Came back, you know, started Haagen-Dazs outside the US and another consumer products job. Always kept pretty current on tech. I was a guy building a LAN in my house with wires down the hallway and things like that because it was just always a passion. And a gamer. You know, I remember my ex-wife telling me that, you know, I told her I never exposed my kids to gaming, and she's like, you're so full of shit. That's like, what are you talking about? And then she finds these pictures of me with my 1.5-year-old on my knee while I'm playing Doom on a PC. and then another one where there's a video from Christmas when they're 3 and 5, and we're doing headshots. And so I guess our perceptions aren't always as accurate as they might otherwise be. But anyway, ended up doing that, ended up running Wilson Sporting Goods, which got me into the sports business. And another consumer products thing, really. But then I got to know the commissioners of all the leagues and the people that ran the sports world. And at the time, mid-90s, EA was really just a sports business. They didn't have anything else outside of sports.
Right.
And they wanted somebody that could help them sort of ascend the ladder towards better relationships with leagues. And so I was pretty obvious for that. And the first thing I did is got them into things like Harry Potter and Sims and other things that weren't sports. But so that got me to EA, left EA to do private equity in the same space roughly, back to EA, and then 15 years, selling about $50 billion worth of games is a long time to do one thing. And I thought I was going to go back to investing. I invested in Oculus and Unity and many other things. One of them, just kept drawing me closer and closer, which was Unity, and I certainly didn't expect to take the job running it, but I ended up doing that.
That's great. Great sequence. Please.
Hi, John. Thanks for joining us today. Alvaro, a second-year MBA student here at Haas. I've got a strong interest in small and medium businesses. As you know, in the US, around 50% of the people are employed by small businesses. My question is, how do you think AI is going to impact small and medium businesses?
I mean, God, you could take that so many different ways. First off, I would argue that AI is largely a large company phenomenon, and the reason is, there's a period of time where, people that create better algorithms are, valuable. They're getting scooped up by Microsoft and Amazon and Apple and Google. But the reality is that the fundamental leverage in AI and machine learning is really in the quantum of data that's controlled by the company. So, a lot of these companies will argue that we're giving our algorithms away for free and that type of thing, and it sounds so very altruistic. But they don't. It says we're giving our algorithms away for free, comma, as long as we get to keep your data. And so there's a very there's a war on now to essentially have large cloud beachheads and large AI data sweepers to distinguish one company from another, and we're in that war. So I think as a career, you can be, do some really innovative things in small companies. But then the next question is, I think what you were really getting at is, how does it affect jobs in those kinds of companies? And, I tend to think that there's a chorus of futurists out there that say that, machine learning and robots are going to destroy jobs, and I just think that's so incredibly wrong. The car industry destroyed the horse and buggy business, but okay, there aren't any people driving horse and buggies anymore, but there's a lot of people driving Ubers and driving cars and driving trucks. And I can get into the specifics and the econometric reasons why I believe this, but I mean, the larger point is, if you just think about it, if you look at medical statistics, about a third of us are going to need help. And there'll be lots and lots of small companies that cater to, the Uber of a nurse at home is not, it's not an organized industry right now. There's lots of little companies, a few big companies operating. But I can give you case after case after case how large population shifts and demographic shifts and aging shifts and how we get our groceries and how we get from point A to point B is going to spawn huge opportunities for lots of small and medium-sized businesses. I don't think they're going to necessarily be more displaced. I don't share the dystopian view that a lot of bigger thinkers seem to have. They're bigger thinkers, so maybe they're smarter than me, but I don't necessarily think that. There's certainly not a lot of history of that. One little bit of a counter, though. One thing that has changed in my lifetime and career has been in how people get fixed on geography and career, more so today than they did 20, 30 years ago. People moved for jobs 20, 30 years ago, and they found shifting industries, simple. They didn't define themselves as much by their jobs as they do today. The point that I'm trying to make is I think the one counterpoint is it's going to be very hard, in a world that's changing as rapidly as the one we're in, partly driven by the insights of AI and data, to keep the same job in the same company in the same geography. Governments need to train people to tackle new challenges, because it's very unlikely you're going to pick something where the same job exists 30 years from now or 20 years from now, small company or big company. I think we're going to be ready to be, infinitely flexible and continue to learn. and try new things. I think that's the only thing that kind of runs counter to the fact that jobs are going to go away. It's your job might go away, but 2 more are going to pop up, and you just need to be ready for it.
Thanks for that. Thanks. We have another one here. I don't see anybody on this side. Please go ahead, sir.
Hi, so I've been a believer in VR since Oculus's DK1, and we kind of hit peak hype maybe a year or 2 ago, and then crypto's kind of taken over. When do you see VR really taking off? I mean, right now the install base is still small. It doesn't make sense for developers financially to actually build compelling experiences.
So I'll give you a 2-minute answer, and I'll point you to the internet. Look up my name and look up Gap of Disappointment. So I was one of the founding and near founding investors at Oculus. I served on the board. I was deeply involved. And a presentation I've been giving for about 4 years is the Gap of Disappointment presentation, which is, it shows the analyst forecast for the industry and my forecast for the industry. And the point that I was trying to get at is that the ingredients for a successful consumer platform in VR did not exist 2 years ago when these platforms were launched. They were taped together, best I can tell, and I know because I was involved in the manufacturing, process behind it. But more than that, they were priced too high. Consequently, consumers don't buy a lot of them. Consequently, there's not a lot of them, so content makers don't make content for them. And so they didn't really have the ingredients for a successful market at all. And the ingredients of getting the price down, getting the quality up, and getting a content ecosystem to work. What I was forecasting 3 years ago was 2018 start, 2019 to 2020 being where it starts to be a serious consumer market. And I don't have any reason to believe that's not true. But if you want the 25-minute version of it, it's all over the YouTube. But
Hi, so you mentioned that you'd worked with Wilson and now with Unity. I know that the eSports industry is kind of booming at the moment and is projected to grow a lot. How do you see Unity potentially either moving in to assist that industry in growth or not?
in the sports industry?
In like the eSports industry, particularly.
eSports?
eSports.
Oh God, this is one where I've got really different views than most, and I'm actually kind of embarrassed to put them out in this larger public audience because lots of my friends have invested in this. So I think the sports industry is, esports industry is really, really interesting, and a lot of the content that's being built on Unity with people wanting to get into esports, and I think that's wonderful. I think people that are forecasting staggering growth and where the capital value is going to be derived in esports really misunderstand the world, in my opinion. The tradition of the Warriors being worth billions of dollars, or the Raiders being worth not billions but hundreds of millions of dollars, is born of the fact that they live under a special antitrust exemption, where the league itself is pretty much not-profit, and they exist for the purpose of maximizing the profit of the team owners. Last I looked, the people that own the principal games are public companies like Activision, Electronic Arts, and Riot, big now part of Tencent. They are not non-for-profit. Okay, they control the operation of the leagues, literally from A to Z in every way possible. Now, talent will get paid, so players will get paid, but there's a lot of people betting a lot of money on the value of teams, and they're using the analogy to professional sports, and it's just not an apt analogy. I think there's a lot more I can say about it. I do think it'd be a fun place to work, but so where do they make money in sports leagues? Is teams make money and broadcasters make money, distribution makes money. And I think in esports, big game publishers that have got the few properties that they've invested in for decades that can create franchises that are worthy of viewership make money, and people that will distribute that viewership, create and aggregate those audiences like Twitch or YouTube or others, they will make money. And I think there'll be points in time where the teams will make money, the investors in the teams. I just don't think it's billions. I don't think it's going to last.
Thanks for that. This side too.
Thank you for coming in today. I wanted to ask you, what do you think the future of the gaming engine industry is going to be? Are they going to consolidate? How does Unity plan to differentiate itself compared to the other game engines that?
So the gaming engine industry, we're probably 90% of it now. So I'm not sure where consolidation goes from here, but I'm all for it. But on a use basis. So, Unreal makes something that works well, but it's a much smaller footprint in terms of usage. Actually, the really interesting thing is it's not so much what happens in the game industry or the game engine industry. It is what industries do game engines essentially fundamentally disrupt. We're clearly in the process of disrupting film production. We're disrupting, design pipelines for the auto industry. There isn't guys making those fancy dashboards where you can see things and get off the entertainment centers that aren't starting to use Unity or using tools like Unity to create those. I'd say 2/3 of the folks working on autonomous driving need spatial geometry that works really well and fast in real time, and they're using Unity for that, and a couple of other technologies that are similar. The people at CERN are using us to sort of understand the data so they can see it visually as opposed to histograms and, bar charts. People are using it for design. Architecture is now realizing that, people don't want to look at blueprints. They want to walk through the new Warriors Stadium and see two teams on the basketball court to see what it looks like with real-time light mapping. It says it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday in November. And so I think and Mary Meeker writes a lot about this in the Internet report she put out earlier, actually last year now, where he talks about how game industry technologies, and in particular engines, are setting the pace for lots of disruption for content creation pipeline and tools in other industries because they're just more powerful. And those industries didn't used to need that power, but now they want it. And that's back to the CPUs and the GPUs getting more powerful.
That's great. I'll ask a question. If there are no more, we can sum up here soon. But if you thought also about kind of the mentors you've had in your life, or you've probably increasingly heard this word sponsor, right? Where there's some people that sort of said, I'm going to make some opportunities happen for John. Were there some people that played critical roles for you?
There were at different parts of my life, but not throughout my career. So, earlier in my career, I worked at Clorox, and it was the absolute definition of a mentorship or a sponsorship culture. And in fact, one of my greatest mentors or sponsors, next Cal grad, Janet Brady. I know Jan.
I do.
So, she was amazing, and she taught me a lot, and looked out for me and watched out for me. I'd say that I've had an intermittent interaction with people that are you consider sponsors at Pepsi. I had a very strong sponsor who beat the crap out of me all the time, but it was more about trying to teach me something. I'd say as I got to much more senior roles, the sponsorship came more from a network of friends that I could seek advice from than it did from people that were in a position to offer direct assistance in the achievement of anything.
That's nice.
And I don't know if that's bad luck, for me, or if it's a reality that, maybe the last decade we've just all gotten so darn busy. But I know that I still continue to work to mentor people. And so it's been different for me of late. I think the Valley isn't as good at it as, there's cliques and clubs. They're everywhere in the Valley. But I don't know that the same sort of notion of altruism from the mentor's perspective is as big here as it was, when I was in consumer products here, or when I worked in Chicago, or when I worked in London. And, the elders, if you will, felt like it was their responsibility. Of course, now our elders are 33 and they're running $500 billion companies. It maybe hasn't occurred to them.
Well, I'd love also as we get more senior, I think the idea that there is an explicit sort of sponsor there. I like the notion of a networked sponsor kind of a career management approach. Let me toss out a few ideas in summing up here, because there were a lot of great ones. And we have a class that you've heard of, I know, and everybody out there has heard of, problem finding, problem solving. And part of it is about, what's the toolkit? What's the discipline around reframing opportunities and reframing challenges and so forth? And how do we do that? There was one comment you made where you said, we're roughly half of game creation and we want to be half of content creation. Sort of like, what is the market definition, right? What is the opportunity definition? And when you start talking about how big is the current market for content creation, that is a very, very, very large market and very exciting. But anyways, it was one sentence you used, but it was a reframe that I thought is very much what that particular class is about. I loved your point about, you know, that tech creation becomes as simple as movie creation, right? That we teach young people to use Excel. But the notion is, you know, none of us could program in machine language in zeros and ones, but we can do a little bit of programming on our computers. But we are all creating movies. And when you start thinking about some of these tools getting so user-friendly that it's completely accessible to people, that's where you and others are taking us. It's a fascinating idea. And then the two big ideas that you mentioned sort of in terms of career management, you know, learn it. Try to be smarter tomorrow than today, right? This idea that we do atrophy over time and we have to fight it. Anyways, I love that. Students always connection is obvious there. And then pick the one with the best story, right? I mean, I think, you know, at the end of the day, we really do. It's a hackneyed phrase, but we get to do this once, right? And the stories animate our lives.
Yeah, and Rich, when not everyone out there, but almost all of you are decades younger. Trust me on this one, and Rich knows this. You get relegated to be a storyteller, you might as well have some good ones. I mean, yeah. Seriously. I mean, that's your job as an uncle and a more senior person in a company, and you know that you can, you know, that you can put your story, like I can put my story on the exact front of the Iran-Iraq War, because I sold Pepsi to the Iraqis, and I literally was in the foxhole, and so. Those stories are, the color is all you get to go with. So I'd encourage you to go for that.
The storytelling and also the picture painting as leaders and direction setters. John Riccitiello, thank you very, very much. And thank you all for coming.
Thanks, guys.